Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of Square of Self-Love. I am your host and self-love doctor, Dr. Square. Hi, friends. I'm so excited to be back with another episode. And today we'll be talking about emotional intelligence. Stop letting the outside dictate your inside. Okay. Um, Before I get into the episode, of course, I want to welcome any new listeners and thank all of my returning listeners for liking my podcast, I guess. If you don't already follow me on social media, please follow me on Instagram at square.of.self.love. You can also subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. There's a link in my bio on Instagram that will tell you all the places you can listen. But wherever you're listening, please subscribe and please leave a comment and let me know how I'm doing. And of course, please do not forget to fill out the poll, the multiple choice poll at the end of this episode if you are listening on Spotify. But anyway, I'm so excited about this episode. I think it is highly necessary, highly beneficial for anyone. And for our new listeners, I am so excited if this is the first episode you'll be listening to, because I think this is going to be an incredibly useful episode. But I'm biased, so if you don't know anything about me, I can also introduce myself. I am a psychiatry resident. I have my MD, and I'm just really excited about wellness, self-love, self-improvement. And so I wanted to make a podcast essentially focusing on helping people kind of get into their self-love bag, understand what it means to love yourself, implement that really in a healthy way, and how to kind of implement practices that really fulfill that self-love. But my goal with this podcast is kind of to give it a kind of therapeutic feel. So, I'll ask questions that are self-reflective, and it's really for you all, the listeners, to think about, reflect on. I'll also share some of my personal experiences and answers because I'm also on my self-love journey. I think it's a lifelong thing, and I think it's okay to admit that. So, I embrace transparency. But I also embrace, just learning, growth, and really understanding who you are as a person. And so I'm just kind of bold in doing that in front of y'all. But, I encourage you to have a journal and kind of write down, some things that really benefit you in each episode. But if you're listening to this when you drive, or listening to this at the gym, wherever you're listening, I just think it's something really useful to kind of give you to think about. So, and if you never end up getting therapy, maybe in some kind of way, this is like a subtle push to therapy, because, I'll also implement some of the things that I learned there. And some of the things that, I plan to use with patients in therapy, but this is not medical advice, so I'm not giving medical advice or anything like that. But I am kind of just helping people on their self-love journey. So enough about me. Let's get into the business of things. So if you are listening for the first time, the way I like to do every episode is kind of in a decent, consistent structure. So I usually start off just with an opening concept kind of question. And so to start this one off, I want you to think about if you've ever let a difficult situation or someone's, attitude or behavior ruin your day, right? What if you could decide your emotional response instead of letting life's obstacles control your mood? Okay, so that's kind of the concept at hand. If you've ever had a bad day and you're just man, that one thing that happened really messed up my day, or this thing spiraled into the rest of my day just being ruined, And so I really want you to kind of think about, and it happens to all of us. You're not, in the wrong if it happens to you. I know it's happened to me. But how could I have kind of taken control of the day after that, one inciting event? And how might my day have looked, following that? So that's what I want you guys to think about. We're also going to do our affirmations. And so if you are a new listener, I like to do 4 affirmations at the start of every episode. I give it roughly like 2.5 minutes. So if affirmations isn't your jam, probably just skip ahead about 2.5 minutes to give yourself, just like get yourself past that point. But I do encourage you to listen to the affirmations. I think the affirmations are really a nice way to set the tone for every episode. But also, what I like to do with them, I'll repeat them, and I really want you to think about it, repeat it, but really implement it in your mind, right? So think about how you can apply this affirmation throughout the day. If you catch an affirmation that really resonates with you, I encourage you to journal it, write it down, and then keep that as your own and use that, when you do affirmations, whether it be at night or whenever the case may be. And so if it's not your thing, I understand, but try it out and hopefully it's something that helps you. And I really want to emphasize, when people do affirmations, it's not just an idea of, you just repeat this thing over and over. I want you to visualize it. I want you to find emphasis in every word. You'll notice that I emphasize a different word kind of every time I repeat it, because I really want you to find the details in the phrase, and then in those details apply it to yourself. And you have to believe it, you have to practice it, you have to walk the walk, you can't just talk the talk. And so it might feel like everyone's kind of just on this, do your affirmations, but when you do affirmations and apply them and trust them and believe that I am this way, I do behave this way, they really can be significant and really make a difference. So, okay, sorry, y'all. I'll stop rambling. Let's get into these affirmations. I am in control of my emotions and my responses. I am in control of my emotions and my responses. I am in control of my emotions and my responses. I am in control of my emotions and my responses. I can pause, reflect, and choose my response thoughtfully. I can pause, reflect, and choose my response thoughtfully. I can pause, reflect, and choose my response thoughtfully. I let go of what I cannot control and focus on what I can. I let go of what I cannot control and focus on what I can. I let go of what I cannot control and focus on what I can. I choose peace, calm, and self-respect in every moment. I choose peace, calm, and self-respect in every moment. I choose peace, calm, and self-respect in every moment. Okay. I love that part. You guys will hear me say I love that part every time. But I really think it just sets the tone. You know what I mean? All right. So we're going to get into today's episode. We're going to start off with our main points. I believe I had a name for this segment at one point. I don't remember what the name was, but we're going to have to come up with another section name. So stay tuned for that. But we're going to start off with our main point, talking about emotional intelligence. Stop letting the outside dictate your inside. As I mentioned, with every main point, we have some self-reflective questions that goes with each main point. And so, I'll kind of introduce the point, but then also talk about kind of how it relates to me, how I think about it, how I would conceptualize it. And then I give you some self-reflective questions to better understand and kind of think about it for yourself and apply it to your life. All right. So this first point is going to be recognizing triggers and taking a pause. Okay. And so if you're going to do anything to regulate your emotions, you have to recognize your triggers. There's no way that you can figure out what it is that sets you off if you don't take time to reflect and think about, what causes that level of frustration or that response in the first place. So this point really identifies, situations, people, circumstances, whatever the case may be, that commonly pulls out or, triggers those negative emotions. And so we've all, had our own set of circumstances that we've lived through. No one will be able to understand what those circumstances are, and no one can really, justify how they impact you, right? Like, however you respond to something is just how you respond to it. That's okay. But you can't, expect everyone to get that. And you definitely can't trust that everyone will, be accommodating to the things you've been through. It's unfortunate, but I think that's the reality we live in. And so you have to kind of own that and understand that, but there's freedom in that. And so when you recognize that, there's certain situations that you've been through that impact you, however big or small they might have seemed, they impacted you. And so how are they impacting you? How are you still dealing with those things? And I think everyone has, those instances or whatever, I'm sure it seems pretty vague just how I'm talking, but overall, I think we can all agree that, we've all been through something and it's like, I don't know why this, gets to me so bad, or, and we've all heard those people who say, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was just this, but it's not up to anyone else to understand why something impacts you the way it does or to the magnitude that it does. That has nothing to do with anything. The point is it impacted you and it's still impacting you. And for whatever reason, this is something that really bothers you. And so understanding what those triggers are the first step to kind of regulating your emotional response to them. And throughout this episode, I really want to make it known that the point isn't to make this thing smaller to you or less meaningful to you. That's not so much the point. But the point is to regulate your reaction when it comes to things like this. And so I think that is a core quality to have, because you got to recognize, people can't confidently trust people who don't have emotional regulation, people who aren't able to kind of regulate their emotions. They're unpredictable. They don't know, is this going to set you off? And it kind of hinders the environment that you're creating. It kind of makes that environment always kind of hostile, even as an undertone, if that's not your intention, if you kind of just are easily set off and people don't know why. And so that can seep into kind of all aspects of your life, right? That can make relationships hard. That can make, and I mean relationships, outside of intimacy, right? Your friendships, your family relationships, your coworkers. It can make a lot of things difficult. And so this is one of those things that really benefits people just understanding. It helps so much to just kind of acknowledge what those triggers are so that you can practice implementing things to regulate your response. So you can practice pausing and evaluating your feelings before reacting. Okay. So yeah, if I were to think about like a recent time where someone kind of triggered me, I have been working really hard to talk to my friends about voting. And that's really important to me. I feel like right now we are coming up on a very critical election. There's a lot at stake. And as a woman, I feel like, women's rights are definitely at jeopardy with this election. And so I have been encouraging a lot of, my peers to vote. And what I'm noticing is that, certain groups of peers are not interested in voting at all. And so in having a conversation with this associate, I definitely just got so annoyed because I felt like they weren't using logic. They were just kind of just spewing whatever they could say that didn't really make sense. It was very much so like, this isn't a point at all, right? They're saying things like, I'm not voting because I don't think we should put someone above us, right? Like the only person above them is God, which didn't really make all that much sense to me in the sense that, I don't think that's what politics is. I don't think if you're voting for, someone, you're not putting anyone above you or God, So I got frustrated because it was like, okay, this isn't logic. This isn't making sense. This is nonsense. And you can't make sense out of nonsense. I do want us all to understand that. And so I'm a pretty, emotionally sound person. I definitely don't like just go off and like blow up. And so in those cases, I do practice patience and I really just look at the situation for what it is. In that particular situation, I had to understand that you can't fight foolishness with logic. And so that was a fairly easy situation for me to kind of just cross my arms and nod to. And so, sometimes you really do just have to sit there, listen, and think to yourself, wow, I will never be in this situation with this person again. But it's definitely something that I can say like triggered like frustration out of me, right? Because you want to think that, the people around you mean well and think the way you do, just in a healthy sense, right? I think that everyone should get their basic rights. I think that everyone should be afforded the opportunity to advocate for themselves in a medical capacity. And so it's frustrating and disheartening, when you find out that, like there are many, many, many people who just don't feel that way. And so in that way, I guess that's why this triggered me, right? It wasn't that this person was like doing anything personally to attack me. But I do know how I feel about these kind of things and I'm partial to them. So I think that is something that was useful for me to recognize even is the fact that, I care about this type of stuff. And so I have to distinguish and separate my feelings about it from, what this person might be talking about. Because his reasoning had nothing to do with, wellness and medical rights of women. However, that is why I'm so passionate about this point, And so just doing something like that is really helpful. And, just thinking and reflecting on situations like that is helpful because I know even in the future, right, like this election will come and go and the results will be what they are. But moving forward, I will always have situations where people might disagree with, how I view things or how they view things. And so that is why this episode is really useful because it's going to have things where regardless of where you are now and where you will be, it will be applicable. So, but in the end of that conversation, we kind of agreed to disagree and chalked it up. But, had I not had the emotional regulation to recognize, okay, like this conversation isn't going to go anywhere. I'm really only going to waste my own energy by trying to like use logic and like reasoning here. So like, it's best if I kind of just see that there is no like getting this person to agree with me and be comfortable with the idea that we just kind of end the conversation where it is. And that was fine with me. I was actually looking forward to it. So there's that. We're going to talk about our self-reflective questions. So the first self-reflective question is going to be, what situations tend to trigger your strongest emotional reactions? So when I say that, I want you to think about, whether it be with your partner, are there certain topics that you guys just can't seem to talk about? I know a partner that I've had in the past, one of the things we could not talk about was Kevin Samuels. For those who don't know, Kevin Samuels is one guy. He was a YouTuber. He has since passed away, who just had very polarizing views about how he spoke to women, how he spoke about women, how he spoke about relationships. And so it just got to the point where it was like the conversation would never get to a healthy resolution. We could never seem to agree, on the views, which, probably should have been a red flag, but it just never seemed to be something that led to productive and healthy conversation. So it got to the point fairly early where it was just like, we cannot talk about this person. We can't talk about, these videos, because they do stimulate such a strong response. And for me, I feel like for the most part, his views were just polarizing. Like, usually the goal was to separate the views of men and women. Like, that was definitely the point of his persona. And so I think it did its job, right? Like, the point was to get men and women to disagree and then, hopefully have productive discord. But it never seemed to get to productive discord for us. And so I could say, that was a trigger in that way. But even if it's outside of a partnership, are there coworkers that seem to trigger you? Are there certain situations that seem to trigger you? Maybe, if you have one of those career fields that you guys have like a busy season and like a slow season, maybe in the peak season, you're more triggered or you're more easily triggered. But it could be useful for you to kind of recognize what those triggers are, because if it's something that could impact your ability to get a promotion, or your ability to even get along with your coworkers, that's pretty big. Like, you definitely want to fix that. So thinking about your triggers in that way, maybe it's family members. So some people, family, we know, can be a trigger. Like, I'm blessed to like have a pretty good relationship with like my family members. I have a pretty healthy family. It wasn't always that way. And I definitely think, the intentionality of my mother, and my parents in establishing a healthy home life has always been really critical for me and really helpful. But I do know, for some others, your family members might be the only trigger you have. And so recognizing, what triggers you about that. And, if you haven't listened to my episode about implementing boundaries, this is the time to think about that, because you recognize where those boundaries are needed based off of your triggers. What's triggering you? What stresses you out? What makes you feel like you lose control of your emotions? And I think, I really want to highlight this throughout the episode, but emotional control is such a powerful tool, and you cannot give that tool to just anyone. You cannot easily relinquish that control. That is a gift. Like, emotional control can get you so far in the world, but when you're reactive and you have little to no control over your emotions and you kind of just respond on a whim, you're kind of giving that power away, and that's unfortunate. That defeats the purpose, right? Like, and so you should really own and be proud of that. And that's why it's so critical that you do kind of try to master this if it's not something you're good at, which is okay. That's fine. All right. So yeah, like I said, partners, coworkers, family, friends, children, maybe certain situations trigger you. So like running late. I know when I'm running late, that definitely triggers me. It stresses me out. And I feel like, I'm really, 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 really trying to be a timely person, a prompt person. And so when I'm running late, like, it just feels so crummy. Like, it's just like, oh my goodness. Like, I spoke with a good friend of mine. Oh my goodness. Shout out to my girlie. You know who you are. I spoke with a friend who was really struggling with this, and she was just like really, really trying to rush, and it seems like everything was just going wrong. And then she started spiraling, and it was just like, oh my God, like, how much can I relate to that? How much can we all relate to that situation that just feels like I'm so like, I have no grasp on any of this around me, and I'm just trying to get it together. And that's unfortunate. And it's just like, if we just work on, okay, focus on the task at hand, what's in front of you, one foot in front of the other is something that I always tell myself. Like, I can only control what's in front of me right now. What do I need to get done right now? And it's really, really hard. That's not something that I've always been great at. I think that's something that I have always tried to do, and I've gotten much better, over the years, but it's always going to be something that's really hard to kind of manage, because, the better you get at it, the bigger the obstacles come. So the next self-reflective question on identifying your triggers is, how often do you pause before responding, and what stops you from doing so? And so, are you one of those people who, as soon as you're mad, there's no stopping it? Like, there's no coming back. The train has started, like it's rolling, and whatever happens is happening. Like, is that your personality? Are you one of those people who, maybe once you get so like triggered, you don't even know what's going on. Like, you're completely out of control of the situation. You don't even, like, you blank out almost. And so these are very real reactions, right? Like, physically, there's definitely like physiological responses to that heightened anxiety or being, overly stressed or triggered. And so it definitely can happen. But in that moment, you're literally losing control. Like, you're relinquishing that control and giving it to another source or another situation or whatever the case may be. And so just recognizing that, what kind of stops you from getting to the point where you can take a pause? Is it the fact that, the situation is ongoing? Maybe it's just like constantly happening, right? As I talked about with, running late. Another situation that I wanted to kind of present to you guys is, losing. So if you like gamble or anything, and like maybe once you start losing, you get triggered and then you can't stop and you're just kind of like going on and you feel like you need to like win it back. And, that would definitely be the time to pause before you lose all your money. But, pause and think like, okay, what is on the other side of this? Like, if I stop right now and, whether it be in the losing example, whether it be, running late, whether it be an argument, if I stop and think right now, what can I do to mitigate? What can I do to pivot the situation and make things better? And so that's really what I want to kind of encourage you to think about. But yeah, so really identify what stops you from pausing in the first place. Or if you pause often, kudos, like good for you. Because that's honestly like, that's a skill. And I've really had to practice that. The ability to stop, literally pause. You can always, and I really have to think about this. Like, I really had to think about this for myself, at one point, because I feel like in the past I was very like, the type of person who would, be in deep discussion with someone and just listen to respond. And so I had to get out of that habit for sure. But then also, I got to the point where it was more of, I am going to pause, especially if I'm triggered, because oftentimes those are the times where we feel like we need to respond the most, right? When you're triggered, when somebody says something that you're like, oh, absolutely not, or if you are in a situation where you're like, oh my God, like what is going on? Like, those are the times where you definitely need to pause, because you're more than likely going to make more mistakes that leads to you having to take longer, right? Or like delays in the process. So those are definitely the times where you need to pause. So if you're able to pause often, that's okay. Like, the worst thing you can do is say something that you don't mean to, or do something that you didn't mean to, based on this fact that you were not in your right state of mind. But if you pause, you never have to worry about like, I took extra time and then I played myself. You know what I mean? You do, but like for the most part, you're not going to regret taking a second to think. And so give yourself that grace. That's our buzzword. That's our main thing. Give yourself that grace and really allow yourself time to pause. Okay. And then the last self-reflective question on that is, what might change if you could consistently give yourself a moment to reflect before reacting? So what might be different? And that could be huge. Like, the answer could be so big. Maybe you'd be in different relationships. Maybe you'd have a different career. Maybe you'd have better relationships with partners or family or friends or whatever the case may be. Or maybe you'd be exactly where you are right now. But whatever the case may be, it's worth the thought, right? And so think about, what might change if you consistently gave yourself a moment to reflect before reacting. And that can be really vital. And that's okay. This isn't a session where I want to beat up, I don't want you to beat up on yourself about it. This is definitely one of those things that you learn as you go. And life itself is one of those things and life itself is definitely stressful. So if you don't have the best ability to like manage your stress, I get it. Like, that's, that's fair. But as long as you're trying, right? As long as you acknowledge and you're trying, that's the best thing you can do for yourself and for your future relationships. Alrighty, so we're going to get to our second point. And this point in particular is actually pretty critical when it comes to gaining emotional intelligence. And so this is going to be reframing obstacles as neutral events rather than personal attacks. And so when you are able to reframe, certain challenges or things that you might experience, and, look at it for a circumstance that, it's out of your control, it's an isolated event and it's not personal. And, whether or not it was intended to be personal, maybe by someone, it gives you no benefit in identifying it as personal. Like, you don't gain anything if you're like, this is personal versus not, right? But it does cost you, like it costs you your mental well-being, your peace, and just your overall self-esteem if you do feel something is a personal attack on you or your attempt to be, your best self. And so if you're able to reframe obstacles as neutral events rather than a personal setback, that really allows you to maintain that emotional balance. And so when you shift your perspective, you can respond to challenges without letting them control your mood. And also, the outcome is not a reflection of who you are and your self-worth. It is simply the outcome that happened. And maybe it is the result of maybe poor planning or something you might have done, not knowing better, but it's definitely not like a core inadequacy in you. And that can really be freeing. And that can be a really good step in just kind of really respecting and loving yourself. And so if I were to think about, an unexpected setback that I experienced, it would absolutely be failing step 1. And so this is a board exam that's required to take in medical school and for physicians in the US while they're in medical training or medical school. And we have to take a series of board exams. So it's step 1, step 2, and then I'll have to take step 3 within the next year. But I initially failed step 1, and that was really stressful for me. And I can absolutely say I took that personal. And there's not many things that I take personal. I often joke with friends, like, I'm the type of person, I probably should take more things personal than I do. But this is definitely one of those things that it gutted me because I had spent so much time studying for this exam already. I had put so much hope in this, but then I realized I also made this exam of, this monster of an exam. It's 8 hours long. It's 280 multiple choice questions, and it's like, when you break it down, you get maybe a minute and a half per question. And so it's, in depth and really complex. And I had built it up to be some, monster of an exam. And really it wasn't even that. I built it up to, it saying whether or not I could be a doctor, whether I could be a good physician, whether I'd be, a strong physician. And I now know, it was a reflection of none of those things, right? It was just how good I could do a multiple choice test. And I've been validated in so many ways since becoming a physician because so many patients tell me they appreciate me. So many, of my peers say that I'm doing a good job. So many of my superiors and, my attendings or my, bosses for all intents and purposes tell me that I'm doing a good job. And so I've gotten the validation to now look back and say, wow, that test really didn't, have anything to do with who I was as a person, any of my core personality traits or my behaviors. It simply was just an exam. And you can really kind of free yourself, as I mentioned, from, really taking on the load of, am I worth it? Does this mean I'm not good enough? Or even just feeling like, you're a failure. When you kind of do that reframing and can look at a situation in this way. So really think about, just how those unexpected situations, and also they're out of your control, right? Like, these are things that you couldn't control. Some things happen to you simply just because they happen to you. And it's not because of who you are. It's not, I feel like I've had people in my life who were kind of Debbie Downers, and they really only saw things negatively that happened to them. And so I really had to highlight, well, let's talk about the good things that's happened to you. And maybe, if you don't relate to this, right? Let's say you're the type of person who you don't take things personal. I love that for you. Who do you know that does? And how can you handle them? And it can be really helpful to just kind of give them that reframing by asking questions. I try not to tell people what, they should do. Some of my close friends will be like, girl, absolutely not. You be telling me everything. But I try not to, because people often don't take what you tell them to do. But what really sticks with people is the questions that you ask and the ways that you stimulate them to think about something differently. And so, that's a large part of why I wanted to do this podcast the way I do. But even in my personal life, I enjoy asking questions to make people think about it, because I think that's how, I think as well. And if you look back at, history and with some of our, best philosophers throughout, Socrates and things like that, a lot of them used, the Socratic method, like asking questions and asking questions that stimulate thought. And so anyway, that's my nerdiness. But so when I think about, failing step one and how my perspective was shaped based on my response, I can be honest with you. I spent 4 days just in bed eating Chinese food, crying, and watching, I think it was Euphoria at the time. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was watching Euphoria. And I gave myself 4 days to be incredibly depressed. And then I, eventually kind of just told myself, okay, well, I know I have to. So the unfortunate thing about that exam is that you cannot progress in medical school onto your third year of medical school until you pass the exam. So you have to retake it. But in failing it, it's said that, you significantly cut your chances of matching into a specialty. You significantly cut your chances of matching at all. Your options for where you match is just limited. So, I believed all of these. Now I know all of these false things about, what it looks like to fail. And I can honestly tell you, I matched at a program that I'm incredibly proud of. I am in a specialty that I love dearly. And I think everything that happened, regardless of failing, like whether I failed or not, I needed it to be this way. And so, if failing is what led me here, thank you. It ended up being a bonus. And so I say all that to say, sometimes it's really hard to reframe, right? Because you're in the moment. And oftentimes when you're in the moment, it's like, you can't tell that, it's really not what it feels like, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I've heard it kind of explained in ways that made sense to me, at least. If you are standing at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, it just looks like a giant, metal structure, right? But if you zoom out and you look at it, it probably still looks like a giant metal structure, but it's way more beautiful. It's way more beautiful, right? Like it's gorgeous if you see the whole thing, but oftentimes you don't know the beauty that's in it just by standing and looking, at one piece of it. And so oftentimes when we're in these situations that feel like, this is it, it's a huge obstacle. How am I even going to overcome this? And that's often what leads to those emotional responses where it's just like, this is all out of my control. I told you guys, I was in bed literally feeling like I'd ruined my career. I questioned whether or not medicine wanted me, whether or not, I'd be valuable to medicine and all of these awful things. But then, after looking back and even just reframing it, it's like, okay, well, this is a thing and it happened. And what am I going to do with it? And how am I going to move on from it? And, I know this thing isn't going to be the last part of my journey. So, let's pack it up and get to going. And so that's really kind of just the way I worked with it. I'm not saying, that's the best way. I'm not saying, you should do that. But that's what worked for me. And so I really want to highlight, this is an actual practice that's called cognitive reframing. And so you use this when you feel a negative emotion and you ask yourself, what is the thought I'm having that's causing this feeling? Is there another more neutral or positive way to view the situation? And what evidence do you have for or against your initial thoughts. And I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. Oftentimes we feel one way, and there's so much that goes into that. Like, I'm not going to dig into like the background of cognitive reframing, and therapy itself can tell you why you think the way you do. But there's so many encounters and interaction and experiences that go into your thinking that this situation is one way. And when you get fixated on, I've failed myself, right? Think about, I mean, I'm fortunate to where my family would have loved me regardless of my career, but like a lot of my peers, their parents, they needed to be a doctor. They needed to be a physician, in order to make their family happy. And so a lot of them felt that stress of, I'm going to let my family down. I'm going to disappoint my loved ones. And that's huge. But if you just reframe it, if you think about, okay, what is it that's causing this feeling? Is there a more neutral or even positive way to look at this situation? Maybe I won't fail my family. Maybe my parents will still love me. And what evidence do I have for or against my initial thoughts? And so that can be really, really, really helpful. And I cannot stress this enough. If you do not have a therapist, everyone needs a therapist. I encourage you to get one. And I know everyone's like, get a therapist, whatever. But like, honestly, it's just such a nice way to reframe your thinking. If you go throughout your whole life just thinking the one way you do, how many things will you block out? Okay, sorry. I'm not going to go on a tangent, y'all. I know. Okay. But, get a therapist. It's always beneficial. Therapy's awesome. But, can't ask me because I'm a resident right now and I have no time I need to get a therapist at this point. They always recommend residents get therapists. And so I'm trying to find one, but I also have to work it into my schedule. So isn't that ironic? But so that's the idea with this point, is cognitive reframing. Our self-reflective questions for this point of reframing obstacles as neutral events rather than personal attacks is going to be, how often do you see obstacles as personal attacks or signs of failure? And so please never give one situation that much power, because you are so much more than one or even several. You are so much more than any experience, right? Like, your value is not dictated based off of what you go through, nor is it dictated off of your reaction to what you go through. Your value is so much more. And so, if no one tells you that, I want you to truly believe you are so much more significant than any obstacles, any challenges, any hurdles, any setbacks, any fumbles, all of that. You are so much more valuable. And no matter how many times you have to start over, you are at liberty to start over as many, many, many times. So many people will hold that against you, and who freaking cares? Like, you know what? If you want to hold it against me that I started over, okay. Like, and clearly I left you in the version 16 and I'm now on version 20. For a reason, right? Like the people who hold that against you are still stuck on their own setback, still hung up on their own obstacles. And so give yourself that freedom, give yourself that liberty to start over as much as you want to. So our next point is, how would viewing these as neutral or temporary events change your approach? Because oftentimes, if we don't think about what we're doing, we are more at risk to make the same mistake, right? So if you don't think about maybe your response and why this situation is impacting you the way it does, there's going to be another, I mean, it's life, right? Like, there's going to be another obstacle, another challenge. And if you handle it the same way, is it going to make things worse? Is it going to validate kind of those negative feelings that you even have? And so if you take the time to really look at the situation for what it is, make sure to not take it personal. Like, just take it for face value for what it is. And, if it's a temporary event or change, then kind of work with that, roll with the punches, but then think about your reaction and how you can handle it better. And then moving forward, all you can do is try. And so really just think about that. And then our third self-reflective question is, what is one way you can shift your perspective when faced with a challenge? And so, as I mentioned, when you take the time to think about how you're reacting to this situation or challenge, and you kind of implement this question, how can you shift your perspective when faced with a challenge or the next challenge similar to this one? That's going to help you moving forward when you do meet another challenge, right? It's almost guaranteed, right? Like that's the part of life. So these are the things I love this point, because this is so critical. Like it's so helpful. Honestly, I probably could have done one episode just on that. And so the last point that I'm going to just nuzzle in here is practicing emotional detachment from others' actions. And so this is gold. I feel like I got good at this when it came to working in the medical field, working with patients, and even, coworkers, but also especially in the role of a psychiatry physician, just because it's definitely, part of psychiatry is, when you're dealing in the world of psychiatry, people behave based on, the diagnosis, but, that behavior is often a symptom. And so you can't take that personal, right? If I have a patient who's psychotic, doesn't trust anyone, and, a part of their disease pathology is they don't trust me, and they think, regardless of, whether or not they know me, because they probably don't. But if they think the worst of me, right, I can't take that personal. I can give you an example. I had a patient who, it was very dependent on the day, whether or not this patient liked me. And when this patient didn't like me, they did not like me. I wasn't allowed in their room. They were super short and like snippy with me. They'd curse at me. They never got hostile with me, but it was just very obvious that they did not like me. However, when they did like me, I was able to ask them questions. I was able to kind of check up on them and see just like how their management was going, and, whether or not the new things we'd implemented in their care worked, whether or not the medication was working, if they were having reactions, like all of these things were fine depending on the day. But I couldn't take it personal. There were other times when, I've had patients who were legitimately so mad at me. Very frequently. And this isn't even in the psychiatry patients. I had patients when I was on general medicine, and they were mad at me. And, I recognize, being able to recognize that like being in the hospital is not a great experience. Like usually people are at their worst when they're in the hospital, right? They're stuck in a bed or they're stuck in a room. They can't do their usual routine or things they want to do, their hobbies, interact with their loved ones. Like it's very restricting. So I recognize like the hospital in and of itself is a frustrating experience. And I have to realize that I can't take it personal if someone's having a terrible day, because they probably are having a terrible day. Even if they aren't having a psychiatric emergency or crisis, if they're in pain, oftentimes if I'm in pain, I'm going to be my worst self. If I'm sleep deprived, I'm going to be my worst self. You know what I mean? And so there's just so much to be said just about that. It would be foolish of me to take it personal that a patient is upset with me or has an attitude or is angry with me. Because I know it's not about me. It has nothing to do with me. It probably has enough to do with me just because I'm the physician and maybe I'm the, one who appears to be over the discharge, right? Sometimes it's very much so out of the physician's control, or the immediate physician's control, whether or not a patient's discharged. And so sometimes it's even out of my hands. But it's just one of those things where it's like, you have to be able to detach maybe what this person says, how this person feels, how upset this person is getting, with who I am as a person and whether or not this holds value. One of the things I also often talk about with my friend, because I have a friend who she's talked about how sometimes she would take things personal and she'd question, why does this person act this way or feel this way? And this really sticks with me. And I have to remind myself of this even, all the time. People often respond and handle you based off of their reactions and how they feel and what they've been, based off of their experiences, the people they've dealt with in the past, how they've been handled in the past, their past traumas, what their fears and insecurities are. So they're handling you or even, treating you or behaving in this way based off of their own set of experiences. That has nothing to do with you. Oftentimes people will project all of that and even if they're not projecting it, they will handle you based off of their own experiences. And that has nothing to do with you. And so you can't take that personal. You have to recognize that where to detach their behaviors from who you are as a person. Another thing too is not everybody has the same magnitude when it comes to, the people I care about and value, their opinion of me versus a stranger versus everything in between, right? If this person, let's say it's a person that I met and I'm just kind of getting to know them, and let's say they make an assumption about me and they, for whatever reason, they don't like how I react. And so, perfect example, the associate that I had mentioned, this person had said, I feel like you're closed-minded, right? Well, they also said I need to educate myself. I did not tell them about my profession, but they did say, I need to educate myself. And then they asked me if I read. This person also asked me to pronounce the word virulence because they could not pronounce it, and so they spelled it. But anyway, so this person said I needed to educate myself and that I was closed-minded. And I, knowing what I know about myself, knowing that this person does not know me, and knowing that this person, has their own set of experiences, has dealt with people the way that they're used to dealing with them, I 1000% did not take that personal. And I actually took it as, this person doesn't know me. And it's a very clear sign that they don't know me if they feel like I need to educate myself while they also cannot pronounce words. So, if I were the type of person to lack self-love, not value myself, and, not have a strong sense of self, I might question, well, do I need to, educate myself? Do I need to open up my mind, right? Or is this person just talking based off of their experiences and their feelings? And are they more than likely just reacting, right? Because that seems like a very poor assumption to make based off of little to no evidence. And so if somebody is doing that to you, you got to recognize, okay, this person is really just saying, like there is such a thing as just saying whatever they can at the moment. And that's fine. But that doesn't mean it's accurate. And so recognizing, this person can feel and say the way they do, but that has no bearing on who I am. And I know they have no stake in saying who I am. And so recognizing that, is really powerful. I mean, because it deflates, any possible manipulation, any possible way that people can, and people will use their words to manipulate you. And so recognizing if someone, even those that you love, some people have these interactions with people that they think they should be able to trust. And that's unfortunate. And I can't apologize more, for people who have to deal with that. But, should your loved one or someone you're close to say, something about you that you just don't feel is true or doesn't align with who you believe yourself to be, and you've done the work, you've tried to be, let's say, you've tried to be a well-rounded person, right? You read, you travel, you do all these things. And someone you love still insists that, oh, you're close-minded. Oh, you don't think, And it's like, you have to be confident in yourself and strong enough in your self-love journey to say, you're wrong. That's not true. That's not who I am. And I will advocate for myself in saying that's not who I am. That is what I need you to do. And that's going to really free you. So when you practice emotional detachment from other people's actions, other people's behaviors, look at what they do for who they are. Baby, when I tell you this is the best way to protect your peace, when you learn to, make it about them, right? You protect your peace and you avoid taking someone else's burdens on. Like, that's so freeing, because that has nothing to do with you. Oftentimes, if, and I see this often, like, if somebody's rude, right? There's plenty of rude people in this world, but too many of them are adults, to be honest. But, if somebody's rude to you, you got to really think about, what's going on in their day. Maybe they're rushing, right? Maybe they have only encountered rude people. Maybe they don't know what it is to actually have manners, or maybe they've never had manners. And, most of the time people just let them be rude to them. But how does that cost them, right? Maybe their relationships are strained because they're rude. Maybe they don't get along well with even, associates and strangers. They miss out on opportunities and friendly, encounters because of their rudeness. So I think about stuff like that. Like, how does who this person is actually manifest, and how does it look, and why? But that's the nerdy side of me. But all of that to say, it is liberating, like you wouldn't believe, when you just don't take things personal. So I highly encourage you to not take things personal. So let's get into our self-reflective questions. How often do you take others' actions personally? And so if this is something that you see yourself kind of doing, and think about it, like, what things get on your nerves when you start going over your triggers, things that are out of your control, and it's literally like, oh my goodness, like, this person got an attitude with me, and now the rest of my day is ruined. And so, how often does it seem that happens? Second self-reflective question is, what would change if you could detach your emotions from others' behavior? Because that's like a lot. Like, the amount of people that you encounter in a day, and then based off of their behaviors, that's a lot of like flipping and feeling all types of ways. Just based off of like encounters with different people. That's a lot. That sounds draining. And so you'd probably have more energy. Just like guessing. You'd probably be more content. You'd probably enjoy, social spaces and dealing with people more. I think COVID really highlighted kind of what it feels like to be without people. And a lot of people thrived in that environment. But really, like do think about that. How might things change for you if you were able to detach better? And then how can you practice empathy without absorbing someone else's negativity? Now, this is a good one. Like, it is very hard to not absorb what other people might be going through, especially if you are surrounded by people who don't know any better but to spew that onto you, right? If all they know to do is toxically, because this is very toxic, but if all they do is kind of project and throw their problems onto you, or maybe they just vent way too much, you need to be in a space to either tell them, hey, not right now, not today, not like this, not at all, not ever. But you can also, be there with them, but you don't have to be in it with them. So there's actually a video, and I had to refresh myself on it, but it's by Brene Brown on YouTube. And I've seen this video several times, in different, conferences and different like team building meetings and things like that. But in the video, it basically highlights the difference between empathy and sympathy. And it gives you, a great image of someone who is depressed and kind of down and really just, feeling bad. And, a bear comes in, it's a fox that's feeling depressed. And then a bear comes in, and they understand that experience from their own perspective. And so they are able to empathize with the fox. However, it gets to a point where it distinguishes empathy from sympathy, where, a moose comes in and they're like, oh, that sucks. And then they have sympathy, but they aren't able to relate with that person. And being able to relate to someone in an empathic way is healthy. But, it is important to not get burdened with their problems or, allow their issues to impact how you behave in your day. And so that can be hard, right? Because empathy is healthy. It's respectful. It's a sign of love. But it's also something that you have to be very intentional about. You have to be mindful of how it impacts you. Empaths often, want to feel for others. They want to be able to support others, and they're able to do that from their own experiences often. But it's also important to have a safe boundary, right? Have a safeguard for you, and be in a position where you can be empathic and you can really be there for the people you care about. But you can also be there for yourself because you owe it to yourself. How can you be there for people who are going through things, but also not absorb that? And me, I especially have to learn this in the field of psychiatry, but also just being a physician, because, you're dealing with people's problems, every day. You're hearing about some of the complex situations and life obstacles that they're going through. And oftentimes it is really sad. But I have to recognize that, okay, I have to combat my own challenges and I have to manage my own life. And so I have to be strategic and efficient in the ways that I kind of sit with patients and empathize with them while not taking on their challenges as my own. So that is the bulk of the episode. I wanted to give you guys some exercises that might help in your ability to get kind of implementable techniques for regaining that emotional intelligence when you feel overwhelmed. So this first one is the stop technique. And so basically, you know, if you feel like you are losing control of your emotions and you need to regulate, this is an acronym STOP. And so the S stands for stop what you're doing and pause. Okay. The T is take a few deep breaths, focus on slowing down your breathing to reduce that tension, breathe kind of deep and slow. And then O, observe your thoughts, emotions, bodily sensations without judgment, and identify what you're feeling and where you're feeling it. And so focus on your muscles, where they're at right now, and work on relaxing them, and kind of just fix your posture. Kind of just go from head to toe, right? So think about your mind, relax your facial muscles, think about your core. But then too, just like your fists, right? If you're angry, if you're hyperventilating, right? If you're sad, if you're crying, and just kind of give yourself a moment. Think about what your thoughts are right in the moment. Think about your emotions, right? Are you angry? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? Are you annoyed? Are you, agitated? Are you jealous? Are you, I can go on, tearful. And so just in having those emotions, what is your body saying? And that can say a lot, right? Are you closed off? Maybe you're off to the side. Maybe you're, kind of just like kind of in a ball, arms folded. Maybe you're paralyzed, right? Sometimes it's like you can't even feel your body. You're just so angry and it's just like kind of like tingling or whatever the case may be. But don't judge yourself, right? Like this is the situation. This is where you're at. And then what's making you feel this way, right? But then that P is proceed with awareness. Choose a response that aligns with your values and goals. And so when you have this in mind, right? When you know your values, you know who you are, this situation is not worth your peace, your freedom, your mental state. Like it's not worth that. So if you just know, like at your core, you're better than this, you're better than the situation, whatever it might be, and then trust that and then choose your response based on, that. And this technique, is rooted in mindfulness practices. It interrupts that automatic response and brings awareness to physical and emotional states. And it really enables a thoughtful reaction. Okay. So I love that. I cannot emphasize how much I love this episode. I'm going to listen to this and I know I'm just going to be like so excited to listen to it over and over. And honestly, I'll probably listen to it like frequently. Okay. But that wraps up today's episode of Square of Self-Love. As I mentioned, I am your self-love doctor, Dr. Square. And if you don't already follow me on Instagram, please follow me at square.of.self.love, as well as subscribe wherever you're listening to this, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, and leave a comment, rate me 5 stars. Please, please, please. And I plan on getting a more consistent flow. I have a good rotation right now where I have enough time to breathe. In the next few months, I have some other good rotations where I'll be able to breathe. So I'm really looking forward to kind of getting a good flow of episodes out for you guys. And then do engage with me on Instagram. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me. Don't forget, I'm not giving like any medical advice. So, don't ask me anything about like medical. But I do want to engage with you guys. We're going to have our self-love sessions coming soon again. And that was a real hit. And yeah, so more to come from you guys. Trust me, I am trying. And of course, do not forget to fill out the multiple choice poll question. And so this week's multiple choice poll question is, what's your go-to tactic for staying calm in a tense moment? A, taking deep breaths. B, counting to 10. C, physically stepping away. D, reframing your thoughts. And so I love these multiple choice questions. I really hope you guys do too. Of course, don't forget to love yourselves.